Hello and welcome to the podcast Life's Second Act. This is the podcast that delves into the transformative phase of mid to later life, exploring its challenges, new directions and uncertainties that come with it. And we do that through talking to people who have a story to tell, an insight to share, or a snippet of something special. My name is Simon Burgess, and in this episode, we speak to Debbie Thomas.
I think it's pertinent to observe that what we were doing in the first act and then moving into the second act are quite different. First act, we're very much driven by our ego. So that's a very conscious attempt to get stuff, to gain things. You know, we start thinking about our career choice and then we look for our life partner and develop our career and get really good at our career, which affords us our home and our material goods. And I think what happens in the second act is much more driven by our psyche, our soul. It's now about being.
Debbie is 52. She's a daughter, a sibling, partner, stepmother, friend and psychotherapist. And it will be in that last persona that we'll be chatting to her today, a psychotherapist. Debbie has a master's degree in Integrative psychotherapy from the Metanoia Institute and has worked in a number of counselling services in addition to private practice. Debbie has always been interested in people, appreciating the differences between individuals and hearing their stories and personal views. She loves to travel and the collective experience of being part of a music gig or wandering around a gallery, alone or with a partner, yet in the presence of many enjoying their own interpretation of the music or art. Finally, she gains energy and resources from being in and around nature. Most recently, testimony to that is a recent forest bathing event, a guided, mindful and gentle immersion within a beechwood. She says it was an amazingly restorative experience. You can find more details about Debbie on her website, debbiethomasTherapy.co.uk. I'll pop a link in the notes. Hello, Debbie. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, first of all, for being part of this journey. I've been really looking forward to this conversation ever since we were introduced earlier this year. There's so much I'm hoping to unpick today. Looking into your insights, experience and knowledge may help answer a few questions I have about myself or ourselves. Sense of purpose. Is it important? Do we need it? Second act concerns. How entering this phase of life can cause anxiety and push us into those existential questions about legacy, enoughness, and the difference we've made in the world. And how can we develop a healthier self to tackle now and beyond? But before we dive in, can you tell me a little bit about integrative psychotherapy? What is that?
Absolutely, Simon. Yes. So integrative, I think of myself as a relational integrative psychotherapist, and integrative means taking elements from different modalities that are interrelated. So I very much draw on humanistic ways of thinking and practicing, which is very much the antidote to the sort of lie on the couch with a clipboard, you know, the therapist in a white jacket and a clipboard. It's much more growth potential, that we think that actually clients, people have the answers. But it's much more about sort of teasing that out in a therapeutic setting. And I tie that in with some existential thinking as well around, you know, what causes suffering and also what causes healing. And I guess the existential bent is more about, you know, how do we want to be in the world and what are the obstacles from stopping us from being our true authentic selves.
Fantastic. Now, before we dig in a little bit, I've got to just ask you a question which I've asked a lot of people. Where would you put yourself personally on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being you know where you're going, you have a real strong sense of purpose, and 0 being I have no idea where I'm going. Where would you put yourself at the moment and why?
I would say at the moment I'm probably on a good 8.5, 9. Well, I've done a lot of soul searching, Simon, is the truth. If anybody said to me, should I do psychotherapy training? I really like the idea of it. It's tough. There's a lot of sort of personal therapy that's requisite for the training that I did. You have to have supervision, and the training itself is rigorous, but it really makes you sort of look at who you are and sort of tugs away at the defenses and adapted behaviours that we might have accumulated along the way. So I think perhaps my sense of self, my core self is, I'm probably fairly in tune, which gives me that sort of groundedness.
Brilliant. So I'll cut to the chase a bit. For some of those who haven't listened to the previous episodes, I feel a bit lost. I'm not quite sure where I'm heading. I'm lacking a little bit of purpose and that strong sense of direction. I'm starting to question my personal purpose in life, and there seems to be so much change in and around me, especially in my professional capacity. When you mix all this up, I'm a bit sort of discombobulated, I suppose. I don't really know where I'm going. Are my feelings normal? Why do I feel lost? Am I having some kind of breakdown? What's going on with me?
Right, I'm going to therapize you right now, Simon. No, really good questions. And I think often, to be honest, I've had those questions myself, which is why, I went to therapy back in my mid-40s. Well, I started with a life coach, actually. So it's not just about therapy. But I think those are big questions for a lot of people. And I think certainly in the second act. So I thought I might just share a little bit by thinking around that. What I think of purpose, I actually think of meaning. How do we make meaning of our lives? And I wouldn't be the first psychotherapist to suggest that we are meaning-making creatures. It's what we're thrown into this world trying to make meaning. And that, of course, gives us structure and motivation to our lives, So we need to give our living years meaning. But, of course, meaning, it's something different for different people at different ages, right? Or different times of their life. How we felt or what was meaningful in the first act is different in the second act. Just to sort of illustrate that, really, if we think about the early years, we grow up in a familial culture where parents guide our norms and our values, right? They input into our education and help us with our career choices. And then as we grow older and we become young adults and we meet other influential adults along the way, right, who sort of inform our thinking and our meaning making and sort of factor into our purpose, thoughts around purpose. Might even be a careers counsellor at school, But in middle life, changes occur. For example, if we think about being a parent, what our children need from us when they're younger is quite different later on, right? When they're growing up and they're flying the nest and, Simon, I know your children are at uni and I don't know if you find this, but we don't need to parent as intensely anymore. They need a consultant actually rather than direct parenting. And that shifts our role.
Do we need it? I mean, is that meaning? I mean, you mentioned that us as humans, we're sort of meaningful creatures.
Yeah.
Is it really important that we have that? Or what happens if you don't feel that at times?
I think you're right. I think it can be discombobulating. I think what I'm trying to say is meaning shifts. And sometimes we're not always aware that that's happening. We're busy doing the doing, aren't we, in life, certainly in that first act. And I think in the second act, if we think about sort of 14 to, let's just say, mid-40s to 60, our roles in life are changing.
Yeah.
And, using those kids, not needing as much requirement might free up our minds to think about other things, gives us space to think about, what do I want to do? Where do I want to put my money now? I'm not putting it all into the kids, now that my partner and I aren't the parent team doing, putting the kids first, actually what's left, who are we? So I think we do need meaning. I think it gives shape and structure to our lives. I think we've always had that from the beginning. If we're lucky, we grow up in secure families, but that these things then start changing.
And I guess there's no right or wrong meaning or purpose. For some, it may be related to work, it may be related to being a parent, may be related to volunteering or adding to the community. Does it matter for our own personal well-being where that comes from?
I think it is different for different people. I think there are a couple of things that we could talk about. I mean, I was just, what comes to mind, actually, I was just thinking about a piece of theory, and I won't be too heavy with it, but there's a model by Erik Erikson. He was a psychoanalyst in the 50s and 60s, actually, and he talked about the 8 stages of psychosocial development. And the stage in life that's pertinent, I think, to the second act, 40 to sort of 65-year-olds, is what he called generativity. And actually, he said there's a bit of a conflict between generativity and stagnation. But if we are doing what's sort of purposeful within this, then we can get some good psychological value from this. And what he talked about was needing to carry out socially valuable or valued tasks. What you've just alluded to, sort of community there. Stewardship, he felt, was important for this age. You know, how can I leave? What can I do to leave the world or my, relationships better than how I found them? To be proud of our achievements as well, and using leisure time creatively. He was really sort of hot on that. But I think when you're talking about, meaning is different for each person, and we can get that sense of purpose from different areas.
Just talk to me about some of those common feelings that can start bubbling up to the surface from the mid-40s. I guess in my case, it's probably anxiety, questions around legacy.
Yeah.
The part that I know we've touched on, the changing family. What are some of those other things that can play a part in how we feel and sort of creep up on us?
I think anxiety is an output. I think anxiety and low mood or depression, it alerts us to something that's not quite right, or it alerts us to, I think, change, actually, first act to second act. Things that come to mind, life shifts, as you said, our roles are no longer as required as they were. And I think that impacts our identity. I'm not feeling the same as I was. Or I think life shifts, including mastery at work. If we're in a certain career.
Yeah.
I remember in my mid-40s, peaking, really, might sound a bit arrogant, but I think I reached the peak of my learning development career. And I was getting bored, actually. And I felt like I'd lost momentum and drive. That was confusing.
So just on that, did you feel guilty feeling bored? If I relate that to myself, video and the profession that I've been in it for 35 years. I know no different.
Yeah.
So it feels strange to even come to terms with the fact that maybe, I hate to say this, but maybe there are parts of it that I'm a little bit done with. Don't really like saying that out loud, but how did you cope with that sort of realization that maybe your career, that you were getting a bit bored with it? Was that easy to accept?
I think it was a process. There were other elements that moved me into changing career, but I felt quite strongly that I deserved to be not happy all the time, but to feel content. It was kind of gnawing away at me. And also I felt like I was doing others a disservice, actually, Simon, that people around me, my clients, weren't getting the best of me. So, yeah, I wasn't feeling guilty. I've always had drive, a certain amount of drive, and I never thought I'd be the sort of person who would go, I don't know, do a round of golf in retirement or whatever. I did, I thought I'd be working later on, and I was happy with that. But I think there's a sense of, I'm not giving what I used to give. And that felt disingenuous, actually. So that was part of my sort of thought process in terms of thinking, actually, what's next?
Yeah, interesting. Are there any ways that when we do start having these feelings where you can feel a little unsettled, are there any sort of ways that we can start to reframe that or to tackle it? Or do we just need to be patient, see what the world gives us? Are there any things we can do to sort of be kind to ourselves?
Yeah, I think not pushing it away is really important. I do feel that strongly from a sort of, as a mental health practitioner. I think acknowledging those feelings, and we might not be used to doing that. I think sometimes we have these sort of archaic internal gremlins that tell us we should be doing things, or we ought to be doing things, and, buck up, get on with it. Whatever you do in life, make sure it's to the best of your ability. And maybe, some of these things have been bestowed upon us, haven't they, intergenerationally, I think. So that can be quite difficult to tease out, actually, what do I want to do? And But I think it's interesting what you're saying about, I'm maybe I'm bored or I'm not enjoying this anymore, and I feel a bit guilty about that. But if you've not known anything different, and I think this is part of the challenge moving from first act into second, when our roles are changing and our physical selves are changing, what do we do with these feelings? So don't put them away, I think is important. Start a conversation, which is why I think this is important, Simon. I think it's a bit like menopause or death, really. We just don't talk about the second act.
Yeah. The value of talking to people, do you feel that really can help, even if it's a friend or just chatting with a mate in the pub or seeing a therapist? Just talk me through the experiences that you've seen of how it really can transform how people look at the lives that they've got and accept the good things that they've got, as opposed to worrying too much, I guess, about what's down the line.
Absolutely right. I think talking is where it's at. And I think that the process of that is hearing yourself out loud and having professional and whatever guys, whether that's, a life coach, it's horses for courses. I can be evangelical about therapy, but it could be a counsellor, not just a therapist, but to be listened to by another. I think sometimes friends and family, although that can be really helpful, could sometimes have an agenda. You should do this, more of the shoulds, more of the oughts. You ought to do this,
You said before, I think I've heard you say we should all over ourselves.
We do shit all over ourselves sometimes. And again, I'm saying, so sort of archaic voices, whose voice is that? I'll say to a client often, it sounds very parental, very judgmental. Maybe it was a headmaster or a scary boss. I think get the conversation going, I feel is really important. And it's often, clients, not just clients, but peers will say, as soon as you take a step towards somebody, I'm feeling like this. Do you ever feel like this? Oh man, absolutely. Of course, yeah, I do. And that sort of bi-directional communication, that sense of being heard and not feeling alone in the world.
As a society, are we getting better?
I don't think the Brits have a shrink on speed dial just yet. I don't think that's true, but I think there's more awareness. The government put a lot of money into talk therapy, so making CBT available to people. I'm really happy to say that half of my practice are male clients. I think something is happening. Occasionally they'll come to me via relational work, couples therapy, a bit of a toe dip there, and then come in as a consequence. Yes, I think the conversation we're getting better, but we've got far to go, I think.
For those in a similar position to myself, I need to be looking at this stage as quite natural. It's what happens. It's a natural transition. There's a natural shift. What can we do to create that healthier relationship with oneself?
I think it's pertinent to observe that what we were doing in the first act and then moving into the second act are quite different. Been thinking about this, and I've come to the conclusion in our first act we're very much driven by our ego, right? So that's a very conscious attempt to get stuff, to gain things. We start thinking about our career choice, and then we look for our life partner and develop our career and get really good at our career, which affords us our home and our material goods. And I think what happens in the second act is much more driven by our psyche, our soul.
Okay.
So in our first act, we're much more sort of busy doing the doing, which is when we move into the second act, it's now about being. And there's a lovely, and I will come on to that question now, Simon, but there's a lovely quote I found by an aging Hollywood actress who's in her early 90s now, third act. She said, in life, the first act is always really exciting, but it's in the second act, that's where the depth is. And I think it's about getting to know yourself in the second act. If we're privileged enough, we can start taking the foot off the gas a little bit. Perhaps we've got some savings now. We don't need to be working quite so hard. Maybe we can go part-time. Maybe, we can start to play with ideas. But I think this is this new practice for people. This lovely model, the holistic integrated adult, which I must, attribute to an ex-tutor of mine, Rachel Cook, a psychotherapist and author and tutor. And to bring it to life, I guess if we think of a circle in the middle, which is our self, and branching from that are the elements that sort of create the human, really, our human self. And that includes the creative element of us, the physical element, mental, creative, playful. I think sexual's on there as well. And I think it's a really good model when reflecting in the second act, as we update our lives and tune into the needs and motivations of middle adulthood, which are different from the first part of our life.
Yeah.
And I thought I might bring that to life with some examples, if that's helpful.
Fantastic. Yeah, excellent.
So although I think we need to be nurturing and taking care of all of those elements, I know sometimes if I'm too in my head with clinical work, I need to remember at the weekend to do something creative, i.e. go to an art gallery or social, go meet up with some friends and really be intentional about it. I think that's the other thing as well, is the intention. But I just sort of bring it to life, how people are gravitating and giving themselves permission to do some of the things that perhaps they couldn't do in the first act. They've got more time, perhaps a little bit more solvent now, a little bit more, not, comfortable, so that they can start thinking about these things. For example, the social element. I know somebody in retirement who in their career loved supporting and helping and organising. They're now the chairman of their local tennis club. Physical, a friend of mine decided that she wanted to compete in all the 6 marathon majors. So she started that in her early 40s and is still doing that in her early 50s. Playful, I've got a client who is trying to work out how he can spend more time with his grandchildren. He has been questioning that. Is it okay to spend 2 or 3 days looking after my children? Is that normal? Well, do you like it? Yes, I do. Go for it. Mental. My uncle's a great example. In his early 60s, he wanted to make sure that he kept his mind sharp, so he started getting up at 5:30 every morning to learn Italian. And creative, final example, this is a lockdown business, actually, one of those lockdown businesses. But my friend in her late 40s decided that she wants to marry her creative drive with her wanting to be of use in the community. So we're going back to that stewardship and those, doing something socially valuable in the community, as Erickson mentioned. So she's created a business that brings gardeners together with vulnerable and elderly adults in order to nurture their gardens and reduce their sense of isolation. So I think, this is quite a departure from her working in the service industry for many years. She does it part-time, but it's something that's real soul work.
Yeah. Just picking up on something you mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure whether it's on that reel or not, but you mentioned sexual.
Yeah.
I appreciate this is different for different people, but is that important as we get older?
Having sex,
being intimate.
Yeah.
I appreciate everybody is different.
Yeah.
But is that another element that can play into how we feel about ourselves or how we feel about our partners?
I think so. I think as a relational therapist, I think it's a question we often ask early on. How is your sex life? How is your intimate life? I think it says something about our own self-esteem, and as well as the connectivity with our partner. We're not saying it's the be-all and end-all, but it is a core indicator as to where we are individually and in connection with our partner. So yes, I think, and of course it brings with it so many wonderful, feelings of dopamine and all the other sort of the health benefits that go with it. But again, I think as we update the representation of ourselves and the roles that we play, I work with couples who get quite lost. They sort of lost themselves in the family business, like the family becomes a business, doesn't it? Keeping the operation running and almost a sort of sense of, well, who are we together? And get lost. And often I encourage in couples work, let's go back to courtship, let's go back and see what's there. What is it that you found attractive about one another? and build it from there, and not just go straight to, you should be practicing sex this amount of times a week, but just to find that spark of what was it that drew us together in the first place.
So there's a mixture of elements here that can play into, I suppose, it's that holistic element. Then we need to look at the play, the fun, the work, the contribution, all those elements that you spoke about. But I think the key thing they're picking up for me is just that giving permission to yourself.
Yes.
Why do so many people find that difficult?
It's a big question.
Are we just wired that way? Is it just come up through our life? Because that's definitely something giving myself permission.
Yeah.
I find really difficult. I've had therapy in the past, and I'm very conscious that maybe my work ethic is a certain kind of work ethic I've had for 35 years. Trying to change that and trying to change the way that I'm wired is really difficult, even though my circumstances now are very different to where they were 35 years ago. As you said, the ego maybe was driving me back then, wanting a career, finding that, wanting this, that and the other.
Yeah.
So to have that shift, my circumstances are different now, but still trying to change, give yourself permission for that change is really tough.
I do think our parents can impact, the way that we feel. I mean, you suggested, are we wired? I think we are. Sometimes things get imposed upon us. And I go back to the shoulds, but that sort of critical parent, this is what we've always done, and I definitely work with clients who are really stuck. And so we spend time sort of even fantasizing, or playing in the practice room. You don't have to do anything out there. Just what are you drawn to? What and how does that make you feel? Well, I get a bit of a fizz in my stomach, and I can feel my shoulders are relaxing. So I don't think it's an overnight give yourself permission. I mean that feels a bit sort of like a token gesture, really. It's not. I think it's a process, actually.
Being patient, being mindful to it, if you feel it's important to yourself, but being patient with it.
I think be patient. And I think it's hard when you've got people around you who have expectations of you, right? It might be your partner, it might be your kids, people that you work with, to do a bit of a 180 and just take off. I know people who are deciding to really sort of get into health and in their 50s and stop drinking. And boy, has that had an impact on, you're not quite in our club anymore. So I think there's a secondary gain actually to not giving ourselves permission sometimes. And that's maybe because we don't want to be ousted from the social group we're in, or we don't want people to form opinions or judge us, But I do believe that the psyche will come knocking.
So that sense of change then, there is a shift and there is more, I guess, we can expect from life, be that new knowledge, possibly new relationships, new experiences, making a difference to those who we meet, who we work with, who we play with. What do we got to look forward to? Again, with some of your stories and your journeys with some of your clients, there's a lot of good, I guess, we've got to look forward to here as well, isn't there?
So much good. I think this is our time. I think it's taking on a new practice of actually thinking, what could life look like? It's not what I've known before. And I think we've got to be really aware as well, if we bring in a little bit of neurobiology, or think about the brain, it doesn't like change. We're hardwired for survival, right? So anything other than do what you do, what you've always done, just do it. The brain doesn't want you to go off and explore and get a Winnebago and go traveling around Europe. Why would you do that? There aren't dinosaurs out there, and that's the reptilian brain we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something there as well as recognizing that, yes, it'd be wonderful we could pursue all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I think it takes a bit of time to do that.
If you don't mind, can I just ask you a little bit about your personal journey then? You've obviously said at the beginning that you feel you have a stronger sense of purpose now and you feel that you know where you're going. Just talk to me about your change, because you've made a shift and a change. How was that? how did you find it? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, I think it took time. I think so. I would say it was my mid-40s, and again, I think I keep going back to that Erickson model, but that sort of that age time, and I think historically we've called it midlife crisis, haven't we? Which I think if just get rid of that label, its second act is much more appropriate. And I was working in corporate. I was traveling all around the world. I was schlepping it to Canary Wharf, getting up at 5:30, not getting home till 9, and yeah, to a degree, I love what I did. I've met some great people. It really, sort of lent into my enjoying people and culture and that stuff. But what I was finding is that I wasn't really living authentically. Okay, and what I mean by that is, I felt my own values were getting pushed and thwarted, actually, and what we call our internal locus of control. So I didn't have much sense of self-agency or decision-making ability, and I found that really, really tough. Bit of self-disclosure here. I had some struggles growing up. I felt very minimized and thwarted in my own family. It's very hard for me to find my voice, and I wasn't really set up for success. And although I achieved really good things in my corporate career, I realized actually I was perpetuating a similar kind of relationship setting, i.e. having to follow rules and dogma of a large organization. And I wasn't able to express myself individually. And what happened was I was actually getting quite poorly. The longer the hours, the more travel, the more I was told to, tell people to fit in a certain paradigm. It was absolutely grating up against my own value set. Until one day I just thought, enough, I can't keep doing this.
Can I ask on that? What was it? Something specific that happened on that day? I think a lot of the time with decisions, the decision is made in an instant. It's the leading up to that often. We're not sure whether we should or we shouldn't make a change. But was there a particular moment for you that's it?
I think it was a number of moments, honestly. I think it took me, because I'm a giver, I am. And as I said, I wasn't really paying attention to myself, but there were, I would say within a year, I got sick 4 times, and I just thought, my body, this is a somatic experience in my body. My brain isn't paying attention, but my body's telling me this is wrong. This isn't sustainable. So I think it took me probably about a year, I'll be perfectly honest. And I went to see a life coach, actually. And although, she was saying, oh, you just go into consultancy, go into, do what you're doing, but do it for yourself. And I thought, no, that's not it. And really simple, this is as untherapeutic as it gets. But I asked myself the $1 million question, if I won the lottery and I exhausted all those holidays and wonderful things, what would I be left with? And it's like, I want to help people. I want to help people break out of the unhealthy patterns like I was in. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And something of a wounded healer, I think. Carl Jung talked about that. That's not my label, but yeah.
Again, before we move on, how do you feel about yourself now when you look back at that change you made a few years ago now, but how do you feel about yourself now?
I feel more in tune with myself. I feel I'm different, actually. I'm a bit different. I think I was all things to all people, and I'm much more reserved now. I'm much more discerning, and I wake up in the morning and I don't have that dread anymore. I really, because I've made my choices, and the training was as rigorous as it gets. It was tough, but what it did was kind of melt away some of those defenses, some of the false self, if you like, that was in play, that wasn't really who I was. I was always there, but just I was presenting a different version. Yeah.
So if with your personal experience then, and then the change that you've made into psychotherapy and what you've learned there and how you feel about yourself moving forward, what kinds of advice can we give those similar to myself, or what advice can you give me and others who are feeling that little lost, disconnected, lacking that little bit of vision for what life could look like. What can we do? Are there any strategies or techniques that can help us just take that next step? Any sort of final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on some of them. I think acknowledge the change. I think that's important. I think fear, anger, these emotions get a bad rap. They're as valid as any on the palette of emotions, and happiness is an elusive. That's just not a permanent state of being. Okay, so, but I guess it's have confidence in the fact that even though I've said, the reptilian part of the brain doesn't want us to change, the newer part of the brain, is demonstrates neuroplasticity. So we can learn things. I've got peers who are in their late 70s or that still with a full practice, therapy practice. I've got a client in her 80s who's, come to me like, how can I make the most of my life? I'm excited. Well, third, fourth act, and I think to trust in the fact that we can learn new things. There are opportunities for us, but that may take time to discover. I think giving yourself permission, we've spoken about before, to explore or to think about the sorts of things that we might want to do. We don't have to go out and act on them. If you were like, no, I couldn't possibly do that, I shouldn't. Just back of the beer mat, sit down, jot some ideas down, and what are you drawn to? Perhaps what have you been drawn to that you haven't accessed for many years? What was it about that, your favourite pastimes and interests? Can you bring those to life now? Talk to people. We've spoken about that as well. People will have similar feelings, no doubt. But we just, I don't know, somehow we might be ashamed of these wants and desires bubbling to the surface. No, we should be having those. And I think importantly, if you're finding obstacles to going with the flow and allowing those to manifest, speak to somebody professionally. For those who have thought about counselling or therapy, and I'm not at that place, I'm not that bad yet. It's not about that. I have people coming just saying, things aren't quite where I want them to be. I just want to explore that. And I think working with a professional, they will give you permission if you can't give it to yourself. And they will help loosen those shackles. And will it help explore with you? Because I think we get stuck looking through a certain lens. And working with a professional can help you perhaps look at life through a different one,
Brilliant. Oh, that's really useful. Debbie, thank you. That's really interesting. I found that really enjoyable. I've just got one last question. The forest bathing event. What was that? What did that give you? And what was that all about?
That's fantastic. And I'm going to have to slap my wrist now because I can't remember the Japanese. It's a Japanese term. And it was a Japanese tutor some years ago who discovered when he took his students out in between grafting in the classroom into a forest setting in a mindful way, they were more able to get on with their studies when they were back in the classroom. They had more sense of well-being and clarity. And I've noticed there are a number of these events going on in the UK, and it doesn't require taking off your clothes or anything strange. It's a mindful practice. So it's almost like it's a guided walk. This particular one was in a beech wood. And we paid attention to how we walked. We walked really slowly, like you were walking through 4 foot of snow, really carefully. And you looked at how the light was dappled and casting shapes on the wood ground, the forest ground. We sat with the bluebells for 15 minutes. This might sound a bit strange, but, really looked at the colour and the texture and the sensation of the leaves. So it was 2 hours of very purposeful, intentional taking in of what the wood was giving us. And my goodness me, I've just felt so light and so good afterwards. It really got the endorphins going. I would absolutely recommend it to anybody.
Brilliant. Debbie, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I've got a good few takeaways and notes here that I've got to process and work through myself. Again, thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Simon.
I could have kept chatting to Debbie for hours. I think there's so much to work out about what we're going through. Anyway, I think for me, first of all, thank you, Debbie. And, I think there were a few really valuable takeaways for me. Firstly, Debbie reassured me by saying it's a natural process of life. She doesn't think there's anything unusual or pathological about it at all. She underlined that what I was experiencing, and perhaps you too, is a normal, expected part of being human. She highlighted that the midlife transition can be seen as a developmental milestone, just like adolescence or young adulthood. This stage is a period of growth and change. It's a chance to revisit our priorities and make maybe some necessary adjustments. She also mentioned that anxiety and depression during midlife can also be a signal for the need for change, and it's essential to acknowledge these feelings and explore them. Debbie emphasised the importance of reflecting on various aspects of oneself. You may remember she referred to the holistic integrating adult. This touches on the physical, creative, spiritual, social, emotional, mental, playful, and sexual dimensions to maintain a balanced, fulfilling life. Patience and giving permission to yourself stood out to me. She highlighted the importance of giving oneself permission to change and being patient with the process and not being too hard on ourselves. Listening to your body. Her personal journey taught her that being mindful and aware of how your body responds to situations can also be a signal that something isn't right. Finally, she pointed out that therapy or life coaching can play a part in navigating significant life transitions, helping us to explore those areas where things aren't quite right or they're not quite where we want them to be. And I really appreciate her sharing her personal story too, changing career and now how she feels she has a much stronger sense of direction and purpose in her life. If you want to learn more about Debbie, check out her website. I'll pop the link in the show notes. So I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did, and I hope to speak to more people in the future with experience like Debbie's. But until next time, please like, share, subscribe, repost if you can, so we can share these conversations with as many as possible who may be on the journey too. But until next time, take care and goodbye.